In this section of the course where we're looking at the subject of popular music and religion, I'm going to be focusing on Leonard Cohen, who was a Canadian poet, writer, mystic, and singer. I've chosen him just in the interests of full disclosure because I am one of his, for want of a better word, disciples. His music has been with me throughout my life. I remember hearing it as a child and I continue to listen to it. So I'm focusing on it because I know it better than any other topic in this area, and also because Cohen deals very explicitly with religion in his work all across his very long career. And as we've seen in this course, there's religion all around in public and popular culture, but I think Leonard Cohen is a particularly good topic. I want to start now with Leonard Cohen's biography. There have been a number of excellent biographies written on him if you're interested in the topic, but I'm just obviously going to do a very quick sketch because the context in which an artist works is obviously very important, and if we look at his religious biography, that's also of vital importance here. So Leonard Cohen was born into a prominent Jewish family in Montreal in 1932. So if we look at that date, that's just before the Second World War, which of course had devastating impact on Jewish communities across the world. And so this ultimately influences Cohen's writing. His maternal grandfather was a rabbi. So Cohen grew up in a deeply religious environment, knew Hebrew, learned the texts. He's referred to his mother Masha as a refugee from the anti-Semitism of Russia. So his mother, who actually suffered from a lot of trauma as a result of this, was a great influence on Cohen, particularly as his father died when he was still a child. And so we see again the shaping of that Jewish consciousness, the impacts of anti-Semitism, the awareness of that. And his father was a patriotic Canadian. Cohen has said in numerous interviews that his family was always very well aware of sort of having fled to the New World, and Canada giving them shelter was very meaningful for his family. So his father served in World War I, and his health was never the same afterwards. And as I already mentioned, he died when Cohen was quite young. Cohen has referred to his childhood as messianic, and he grew up in a culture of Yiddish and Hebrew and attending synagogue. And I just wanted to note here, and this is something that I have never read anywhere other than in interviews. It's very rarely in religious studies texts, I've never read it anyway, that the Cohens as a group are aware that they are descended from the first priest, Aaron, that some of you may know from the Bible. And so the idea that Cohens are a priestly caste, and just a little story here, a friend that's Jewish and her husband is a Cohen, and so I was at her house and there was a call, and the husband went on the call and gave a blessing to the person over the phone. So this is clearly something that's alive within the community that isn't necessarily written down, but Cohen had a sense of himself as being part of this sort of priestly caste, and he actually refers to himself as a priestly singer. Cohen was also deeply influenced by French Catholic culture in Montreal, and I'm going to be attaching an article about this on Blackboard. So Montreal, prior to the Quiet Revolution of the 1960s, was one of the most Catholic places on earth. And if any of you have been there, you'll know the influence is still very clear. Lots of very, very old and very beautiful churches. So Cohen has been very clear that he was also deeply influenced by that French Catholic culture. Cohen attended McGill University, he took an English degree, and by his 20s, he was already an award-winning poet and novelist. His first book of poetry was called Let Us Compare Mythologies, and so we can see the concerns that are going to be at the center of his life are already there. Well, as a piece of synchronicity here, just as I was composing this, I got a knock on the door and a book was delivered that I had ordered from the University of Ottawa Press called The Demons of Leonard Cohen. It's written by a Belgian scholar, and it's very interesting to me to see how Europeans have interpreted Cohen's work. He's extremely, extremely popular in Europe, and Cohen was always more popular in Canada and Europe than he was in the US. I don't think the US really knew what to do with him. He's a bit dark for them in many ways, I would say. But we can see, even from his very early days, that Cohen has certain themes that recur in his work, and Francis Moose looks at this in the book. So I want to start out at the beginning in terms of his musical career with Suzanne. And so this was first published in 1967 as a song, but it had existed as a poem before. It was a worldwide hit for him, and prior to that by Judy Collins, the folk singer. And it was also the first song of his I remember hearing as a very young child. And so I don't know if I ever fully recovered from hearing this song. And we can see all the themes in the song, love, loss, religion, philosophy in this piece. So the photograph here is a close-up from a church in Old Montreal called Notre Dame de Bon Secours, which is, if not the oldest, one of the oldest churches in Montreal. It was first built in the 17th century and then rebuilt after a fire in 1771. And it's right in the heart of Old Montreal. So in many ways, you could argue it's kind of the heart of Montreal. And so we see, if you ever have the chance to go to see this church, it looks out onto the port. So this figure of the Virgin Mary is looking out onto the water and holding out her arms in a kind of protection and blessing. And so this church became a sailor's church, and so sailors would go in and pray for a safe journey. And so when you go in, there are little ships hanging from the ceiling. So it's a very evocative, very beautiful old space. And I know in Canada, any building over 100 seems ancient to us, so it has that real sense of deep history. And we're going to see in the song and in the poem, Cohen refers to sailors as a kind of metaphor. I'm going to start now by working through the lyrics of Suzanne and picking out some of the themes. I will also be giving you a link to a performance of the song. It's always obviously better to hear it as a song. But I just want to, obviously we could spend hours on this poem, but I'm just going to pick out certain themes. So here in the first part, we see it starts with Suzanne. And so Suzanne, interestingly, Cohen seemed to have a number of important Suzannes in his life. This particular one was a dancer who was married to one of his friends. And so according to him, there was no romance. So it's a kind of an unrequited love song, which, is a typical subject of songs and poems. And so she's also playing what in Jungian psychology you could call kind of animal role, the role of this being an inspiration for Cohen. So Suzanne takes you down to her place near the river. You can hear the boats go by. You can spend the night beside her. And you know that she's half crazy, and that's why you want to be there. And she feeds you tea and oranges that come all the way from China. So he's painting a picture here. And again, as I said earlier, if you know Old Montreal, this will evoke that for you. So Suzanne lived near the St. Lawrence River, and so she's taking him to her place by the river. But clearly this is also a poetic space where he's going, where he's being inspired by these exotic experiences. And as he says later on here, you want to travel with her and you want to travel blind. And you know that she will trust you, for you've touched her perfect body with your mind. So this idea of a kind of a spiritual, physical communion that he's having with this feminine figure. Now here Cohen shifts gears completely, and this is very typical of his work if you follow it through the years, that he'll offer one stanza that's very worldly, very kind of sensual, and then the next will be very religious. And so he does that here. And so he says, and Jesus was a sailor, which I have to say is one of the most remarkable lines in English, in my opinion. And what I've always found so remarkable about this song and poem is Cohen's complete understanding of Christian theology. And I don't fully know where that comes from, but he had a clear sense of affinity with the Christian tradition while remaining obviously a Jew his whole life. But of course, Jesus was a Jew, so it's not that surprising. So he writes, and Jesus was a sailor when he walked upon the water, and he spent a long time watching from his lonely wooden tower. And when he knew for certain only drowning men could see him, he said, all men shall be sailors then, until the sea shall free them. So I find this absolutely remarkable in terms of Christian theology. It's bang on, but expressed in such a poetic and beautiful way, that image of Jesus looking out on the world from from being crucified. And then I find this next part quite devastating. But he himself was broken long before the sky would open, forsaken, almost human. He sank beneath your wisdom like a stone. This is heartbreaking. So, obviously, if you know the story, Jesus was crucified, and the line almost human, I think, is so interesting because traditional Christian theology says that Jesus is both human and divine. And so he just nails it in this very short sentence, the whole kind of Christology. So also, he sank beneath your wisdom like a stone. And for me, this evokes the idea that so many religious leaders have died as a result of their efforts to help humanity. And so the idea that the wisdom of the world is not actual wisdom, that you have to look deeper. And then he repeats this refrain, and you want to travel with him, and you want to travel blind, and you think maybe you'll trust him, for he's touched your perfect body with his mind. And so this links it back to the first part, where he's feeling this way about Suzanne. And so in some ways, it's like that anima figure has now led him into the spiritual realm. And he wants to travel with this spiritual leader, and he wants to have perfect faith and trust in this, in the figure. And here again, some of the most beautiful poetry in English, certainly of the 20th and 21st century. Now Suzanne takes your hand and she leads you to the river. She is wearing rags and feathers from Salvation Army counters, and the sun pours down like honey on Our Lady of the Harbor. And she shows you where to look among the garbage and the flowers. There are heroes in the seaweed, there are children in the morning. They are leaning out for love, and they will lean that way forever, while Suzanne holds the mirror. So again, I think we see Suzanne as this kind of liminal figure who's leading him to the river, which is also a metaphor for religion and spirituality. And I love that she's wearing rags and feathers. You can feel that she's a kind of bohemian, untraditional woman that she's bought from thrift stores. And then the very famous lines, the sun pours down like honey on Our Lady of the Harbor. So that situates us again in Old Montreal with that figure of the Virgin Mary looking out onto the port of Montreal. I want to move us now to looking at the song Hallelujah, which is sort of mid-career for Leonard Cohen. It was published in 1984. And we can see from the title, it's clearly a religious song. It's been used now by many different traditions in various settings as a kind of a hymn. I would say it's become a hymn. And interestingly, this was not a popular song in the 1980s. The album that it was on was not even released in the United States. Cohen's career was at a low ebb, and So it's only kind of in retrospect it's seen as probably his best known song. And I have said that I don't think that anyone should record the song. A, they should be Canadian. B, they should have been in rehab a couple of times, because there have been some terrible versions of this song that are like showstopper Broadway numbers, and it's you can tell that this annoys me, but this is not the kind of song it's meant to be. So the song expresses Cohen's lifelong struggle to reconcile romance, art, religion, and these various kind of themes in his life that are in constant tension. And so we'll see that as we work our way through this song. So the song Hallelujah is a kind of Bible 101, and there are images from the Bible throughout the song. So it starts, "Now I've heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do you? It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, the major lift, the baffled king composing hallelujah." So this is, of course, referring to King David, who's believed within the tradition to have composed the Psalms in the Bible. So he's the great poet, the great singer. So clearly a model for Cohen himself, and King David, of course, central to the Jewish tradition. So I find it interesting, the idea that he's baffled as he's composing this, so that he's been sort of divinely inspired. And I love the line, "But you don't really care for music, do you?" This is pure Cohen, putting in some dry humor here, and probably how he was feeling about record executives around that time, that for them it's all about the money, it's not about the music. So he's going right back to the original religious inspiration for music. In the next section of the song, Cohen brings us much more into mundane reality and his own romantic struggles. And he writes, "Your faith was strong, but you needed proof. You saw her bathing on the roof. Her beauty and the moonlight overthrew you. She tied you to a kitchen chair. She broke your throne and she cut your hair. And from your lips she drew the hallelujah." So we see this interesting struggle that he's having here of bringing together his artistic religious life with kind of family life. And this was actually happening to him. He had become involved with another Suzanne and had children with her. And we know from his biographies that this was a very challenging period for him. So he says right at the outset here, "Your faith was strong." So this idea of having a strong faith and then being overcome by the beauty of a woman. And so we find this throughout Leonard's work, this kind of troubadour who sees a beautiful woman from afar. And of course, he's drawing on the story from the Hebrew Bible of King David, and who sees Bathsheba, who's actually the wife of another man. And so he's drawn into doing the wrong thing because he's overcome by her beauty. In the next section, he seems to be referring to the story of Samson and Delilah. So the idea that the woman is taking away his power, his sense of self-control, but that somehow that this experience is like the religious experience. So she's drawing from his lips the hallelujah, just the way God would do. What to say about this section is just so fantastic, and he's doing so many things here and with humor. So, "You say I took the name in vain. I don't even know the name, but if I did, well, really, what's it to you? There's a blaze of light in every word. It doesn't matter which you heard, the holy or the broken. Hallelujah." And this is very, very famous. There's actually a whole book written on this. I believe it's called The Broken Hallelujah. So you say I took the name in vain. Now, some of you will know the Ten Commandments. One of them is that you shouldn't take the name of God in vain. So somebody's accusing him perhaps of not being properly religious. And we know this did happen with Cohen because he was interested in many different religions. And there's a story that he was on retreat on Mount Baldy doing a Buddhist retreat. And the story is that sort of a group of Jewish people showed up on the mountain trying to bring him back into the fold. But Cohen's been very clear, he never stopped being a Jew, but he always was interested in other religions. He dabbled for a while in Scientology, he practiced Buddhism for a lot of his adult life, and he also was interested in Hindu philosophy, and we see he knew Christianity very well. So he's basically saying, back off with your judgment. And I love this, well, really, what's it to you? So it's none of your business. So here he says there's a blaze of light in every word, and I think he's evoking here sort of the Kabbalah, the mystical part of Judaism, with the idea that every one of the Hebrew letters has divinity within it. But I think he's also saying that all forms of honest, authentic spirituality are valid and the same, and also that there's no perfection in the world, that for him anyway, it's always going to be the broken hallelujah. And this absolutely perfect ending to the song. I did my best, it wasn't much. I couldn't feel, so I tried to touch. I've told the truth, I didn't come to fool you. And even though it all went wrong, I'll stand before the Lord of song with nothing on my tongue but hallelujah. So I really love this. This is such a beautiful sort of look at the imperfections of life and how everybody struggles and fails, but he's trying to tell the truth as he experiences it. And then, even though it all went wrong, I'll stand before the Lord of Song. So this idea that on Judgment Day he'll be able to stand, and of course his God is the Lord of Song, and say to say hallelujah. So I would say, you know, I'm not trying to say I fully understand this song. It's there's so much depth to it, but for me, it's saying the hallelujah is broken, life is imperfect and often tragic, but in the end, he's going to say hallelujah, and he's going to be thankful for his experiences. With this final song, You Want It Darker, it comes from the very last part of Leonard Cohen's career. It was released weeks before he died in 2016. And the world of his fans, anyway, we were aware that he was not well. But it was interesting at that time, David Bowie also passed away around that time, that in a way, both of them, they were working on music and art right until the moment that they passed away. And there were a number of articles written about how they both had quote unquote good deaths, and religious traditions often talk about that, the idea of what is a good death. And so we see with Leonard Cohen that he's working on music right up until the end of his life. With the song You Want It Darker in the whole album, we see Cohen doing it his own way, as he always did throughout his career. So he actually became more popular as he got older, into his 80s. And all of his later albums were best-selling albums, which I think perplexed the critics quite a bit, because clearly they're not your typical pop album. And so one of the most remarkable things on the album is that he uses the cantor from his family synagogue in Montreal to sing on it. So he's clearly connecting it to his end of his life and to religion. I'm not going to go through the whole song. I'll let you listen to it, but there are themes where he's clearly referencing the Holocaust and the darkness of the Holocaust, and how do you retain your faith with that reality, and also using the Hebrew word hineni, which is from Abraham, the idea that he's ready, that he says, I'm ready, my Lord. So he's ready for his death. And Leonard Cohen is buried in the Cohen family plot on Mount Royal in Montreal, as is only appropriate, taking us right back to the very beginning, that this was always in some way kind of his home. I'm going to conclude here just talking a little bit about the outpourings that happened after his death. And it was very interesting to see how people in Montreal reacted, because Cohen's a kind of an interesting figure because he's an Anglophone in a very French city, and there's a lot of politics around that, as I'm sure you're all aware. But it was very touching to see every article was calling him, the great son of Montreal, and there was a absolutely fantastic artistic exhibit on his work that went up the following year. So I made my own pilgrimage to Montreal after his death and went looking for the murals. So there's at least 2 that I know of, and so this is one right in downtown Montreal. So I think it's only appropriate that Leonard Cohen is looking over, like a kind of a saint or an angel, his beloved hometown.